Laura, that was the perfect summary to what was an outstanding panel of presentations, and to all of our panelists, thank you for those really strong presentations. Why don't we open it up to questions from the audience and see if we can sort of further develop some of the themes that people have talked about here. Are there questions? Okay. While you guys are thinking about a question, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Please stand up and introduce yourself if you would.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you for this panel. My name is Michelle Roberts, and I'm with Advocates for Environmental Human Rights. We're headquartered in New Orleans, and I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I was able to be part of the process in New Orleans, and went to Geneva 2 weeks ago. I'm glad to hear that you mentioned New Orleans, and I thank you for doing so. One of the things that we had asked when we were in Geneva and as a part of the shadow reporting process is to be able to speak to the hundreds of thousands of people who are still displaced from New Orleans, the Gulf region, by instituting that of the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement. It is a rights-based process to recovery for disasters, and now that we have the BP oil drilling disaster on top of all of the various storms, we truly need for Congress and for the administration to be able to really hone in on the need to incorporate this in whatever form or fashion it could be, whether it be that of an executive order or the all-out reform of the process. And the other thing we had asked is, based on the fact that we already have a human rights-based speaking executive order in the White House that was instituted by President Clinton, 13107, that a human rights institution be created throughout the federal system, because it's been apparent to us in the process that there is a lack of knowledge among federal agencies on the responsibilities of the treaties. And so therefore, while respectfully it would be wonderful to have CEDAW and the rights of the child and others, but what good are all these treaties if we're not honoring what we already have to the fullest extent of the letter of the law and process? And lastly, I would like to be able to see, hopefully, in future convenings, copies of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the process to which we are all here for. It's nice to have the Constitution, but how can we forward this of the UDHR if it's absent from the room? Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for your question and your comment. I think all of us are very familiar with the work that you've done to raise the issues of the Gulf Coast region to a higher level of recognition and soliciting government response. And we're very familiar with your engagement, both through the network that Ajamu Baraka heads and through the work that others of us have done as well. So you've done an outstanding job there. I think I'm going to invite my colleagues to perhaps speak to some of the points that you raised, but I'll mention a couple of things. I know that because of the work that you and others have done, New Orleans was raised, and the aftermath of the displacement of the residents of the Gulf Coast has been raised and touched a number of the agencies that were there in Geneva and has caused them to begin thinking about how to pursue those issues. The Leadership Conference itself issued a report which was a follow-up to our work on the Census 2010, which helped to identify some of the impacts of displacement in that region, and that report is available, it's online, but it's a follow-up to some of the census work that we've done. So we certainly think the work that you've done is important. I'm not sure if there are others who would like to respond. Laura?
Okay. I think the point that you're making about it's great to ratify other treaties, but we have to figure out how to do the treaty work that we already have. I think they're not mutually exclusive, and I think that what we are fighting for in the Human Rights at Home campaign and individually in our organizations is a more comprehensive approach by the federal government to its obligations under these various treaties. One of our biggest frustrations working with the Obama administration, as much as we applaud them for taking this universal periodic review process seriously, is that you have to go from agency to agency, or this person and that person at state, at the White House, at the National Security Council, at the United Nations. And we don't think that ad hoc approach serves the government well, serves the American citizens well. We need a one-stop shop to go to so that we can convene the right people in each agency who are responsible for making sure the U.S. is acknowledging its obligations and compliant with its obligations. Also, we do need a monitoring body, an external body that says its mission is to look at the U.S.'s obligations under the treaties and its human rights record. And some of us are working closely to craft a legislative approach to creating such a body. But in these economic times, that proposal isn't necessarily the first thing that Hill staffers want to do. But I do think it is a legitimate problem, and it also undermines our legitimacy when the United States cannot respond as effectively as its European counterparts that have institutions and structures in place to respond to its human rights obligations.
I would just also like to thank you so much for your comment and also for your work, and say that what has happened in the Gulf region and what continues to happen is a gross violation, and is also some of the worst violation of housing rights today, and it continues, and we have to keep attention on it. And I agree as well that ratifying treaties or winning human rights victories will not be meaningful unless we follow up with action here at home, and that includes congressional action as well as administrative action, and that's where we have to keep our focus now. And that's what this day is about, I think, this event is about.
John?
Just very, very briefly, I think that your comment, Michelle, and again, we all thank you for the work that the advocates have been involved in, reflect the disconnect between U.S. domestic law and practice and international human rights standards. The Stafford Act, which is the legislative foundation for providing assistance to people who are displaced, is a very important act, but it's inadequate. It has real limitations, and so the push for requiring agencies to be guided by the UN guiding principles on internally displaced persons is in fact the route to go. And it's an example of the importance of us attempting to domesticate international standards and law. And that's why I have to sometimes respectfully push back on colleagues when we say that civil rights are in fact human rights. Well, they aren't, in my opinion. There are some moral implications, of course, but civil and constitutional law and rights are different. So our goal is to try to make them the same, again, to domesticate international standards into domestic law, but that is in fact the thrust of the struggle. These international standards are meant to be a minimum, a base for standards, but because the gap between U.S. practice and law and international standards, we find that those standards, those international standards, become almost like a ceiling. There's a gap. We have to close that gap. So that's my comment.